with the setting up of a violin, if we go from the top down, you have the tuning pegs. These need to be fitted precisely to the holes in the peg box. They need to turn smoothly so that we can actually tune the strings properly. If they aren't fitted properly or don't turn correctly, then tuning the instrument accurately will be a problem. The nut, which is this piece along the end of the fingerboard, it again needs to be fitted so that it has the right curvature. The grooves for the string are accurately cut.
So for example, we have a customer come in sometimes and there's some problem that's stopping them from playing well. There might be a buzzing sound from the E string, or the
it could be that the E string, the groove on the E string is worn down too far and the string then sits against the fingerboard or something like that.
Or maybe, is it possible that the strings could be too close together as well?
That too, yeah. And if they're too close together, then you might find difficulty playing one string because the others interfere with it. The fingerboard itself needs to have, of course, the right relief or scoop in it lengthwise, as well as the right curvature across, but also it needs to actually be the surface flat. Some fingerboards overuse, when you press the string down you'll get little wear spots along it, and sometimes you might press a note down and the string will buzz slightly against one of those pitted wear spots. So occasionally they might need, we call it redressing the fingerboard, where the surface is re-established.
Typical of an old instrument? Or
yeah, but even new instruments, that you need to spend the time to ensure that the surface of the fingerboard is correct.
Quite often instruments arrive here, and because they've come from another country with a different climate, different season, winter, summer.
Acclimatised wood, as the old saying goes, metal rusts, stone wears and wood moves.
Right.
So as that happens, yes, you've got to, once it's acclimatised, then you've got to redress the fingerboard, make it correct. The bridge, of course, needs to be cut correctly, fitting of the feet, as well as the curvature of the top and the clearances of the strings and the thickness of the bridge to allow the vibration of the string to be transmitted accurately into the body. And then, of course, inside the instrument you have the sound post, which is a little dowel of wood that is fitted in between the underside of the top and the back of the instrument. This couples the front and back together.
In various languages, the word for sound post translates to soul.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
It is a violin without a sound post sounds kind of weak and breathy.
Like a foghorn.
Yes. So the sound post is actually
East
a mechanical coupling that sits in between, sits behind the treble side foot of the bridge in a similar spot on the back, and it physically links the vibration of the front and back together and amplifies the sound enormously and focuses it. It has to be fitted accurately to the inside faces of the top and back. A poorly fitted sound post is often a danger to an instrument if it's fitted way too tight, or with the surfaces of the sound post that meet the front and the back, if they're not fitted so that they sit neatly against the wood. If they're the wrong angle or something, they can cause damage to the inside of the instrument, so we need to make sure that's correct. The tailpiece itself, for fine tuning, it needs to simply work properly, and in some cases you will see an instrument that has fine tuners that don't even work properly. Of course, tuning the strings becomes a problem.
Would you recommend it's best for a beginning student to have 4 fine tuners rather than using the pegs to tune the instrument?
Definitely for a beginning student, yes, because it allows for smaller adjustment. The golden rule with violins, particularly the higher performing violins, is the less bits and pieces you have attached to the instrument, the better. So more advanced players have no trouble tuning with the pegs. These are a very efficient and simple device, but certainly a beginning student requires the extra assistance of fine tuners, and then as they gain experience and confidence, well, you can take a couple off and learn to use the pegs. Yeah, and then of course, correctly fitted chin rests and the end button that holds everything together, and the tailpiece. These things all need to be fitted correctly. and just to make sure that the instrument works properly and remains healthy too. Poorly fitted things, some old instruments will show damage to the rib on the lower end here, simply because somebody was overzealous with the chin rest clamps, tightening them too tight, and so you can get all sorts of damage caused in the long run by things that are done badly, and which again is reinforces the need to go over the instrument and make sure everything is set up correctly. And
that's the interesting thing. Even in a standardized form or structure, like a violin which is made in a workshop somewhere that fits a particular model, like for example, our 80 series violins and cellos, each of them needs its own unique setup, because even with a standardized structure, one cello is going to be different to another cello.
Yes, yes. Every piece of wood is different,
yeah,
and they will behave slightly differently as well. And even with instruments that are like, say an 80 series cello or something like that, that you would think that the curvature on the top of the instrument might be the same, but it might not be identical. So the bridge, or when the neck has been fitted to the instrument, with the angle the fingerboard sits at, we call the projection. And if they're slightly different, if this joint here has been done marginally different, then the height that the fingerboard projects to at the bridge may be different by a couple of millimeters, which means the bridge of one instrument doesn't fit precisely on the other. So every instrument, there is no generic setup. There is no standard setup that each instrument has to be done according to itself.
So, for example, someone with a smaller hand and someone with a smaller hand, or someone with a bigger hand. A person with a smaller hand, they're going to want the strings maybe slightly closer to the strings. Someone with a bigger hand, a little higher, so they can get a bit more purchase on the string.
Yes, well, that too. I mean, some players would prefer, with the distances that the strings sit at over the end of the fingerboard here, we call the action, or the string clearances. Some like it lower. Lower it is, the easier it is to play.
Some people are
Some people like it higher, so that you can play much more vigorously and get a lot more strength out of it. There is such a thing as too low.
Yeah.
The point at which it starts to buzz on the fingerboard as you play, and certainly too high is a problem, where not only does it require the strings to be pressed down much too far, but then if they're so high that once you press one string down, other strings may be sitting up too high, they will get in the way of things, and it can cause all sorts of difficulty playing accurately.
When customers call us to come and see us here at Vivaldi's, would it be a good idea for them to ask you about, is there a way of maybe improving the setup of the instrument?
Sure. Well, each instrument, no matter what it is, does need to have it set up to optimized, is often a term that's thrown around. And each customer may have certain preferences they would like. Like I say, some players might like the string action to be slightly lower for ease of playing, or something like that. So there might be various things that we could discuss. Sometimes, in terms of just getting the right sound out of an instrument, it is a matter of things like adjusting the position of the sound post or something like that, that you can tweak the response the same way you might try to optimize the performance of a car engine.
We could even suggest possibly a change of strings.
Yes, we can try
different strings suit different instruments.
Yeah, different strings for different instruments. I've sometimes heard people will talk about, the latest, string that's come out from a manufacturer or something. Popular strings, one of the premium strings on the market today is Eva Parazzi's, which are a great string.
High tension.
But they're high tension, and it's not, violins and musical instruments are not a one-size-fits-all prospect. So Eva Parazzi strings might work great on one particular instrument, and you could take those same strings off that instrument and put them on another, and they may be detrimental to the sound on that instrument, because that instrument may respond to, say, lower tension strings. The old-fashioned gut strings like Eudoxus or something might work brilliantly on that instrument. So it is a matter of also figuring out the best solution And it's much like I've used the car analogy sometimes. The same tyres don't work perfectly on every single car. And
the only way to know it is by trying it, though.
Yes.
So you could say every 6 months to a year you need to upgrade those strings, and some people buy a spare set. So
Yeah.
you could experiment the second time with a different set.
Yes.
To see if at this
Very
time
much
it
so.
works.
Yeah. And with strings, there are some brands of strings that are known to work quite well on most instruments. Maybe not the best string you might put on a particular instrument, but the odd industry standard dominance that it's well known that they pretty much work properly on anything you put them on. Gut strings will work on any instrument. Some of the more specific types of strings, like ones they talk about that are marketed more as soloist type strings and so on like that, well, you need to find out if they work best on your instrument and different brands and things like that. So it's often a case of, over time, a player might find that their preferred string is works well on that violin, but even people who own multiple instruments sometimes will report that they use different strings because those strings work. String A works really well on the one instrument, but not so well on the other. And so it's much like that, and tweaking things like sound post position, bridge heights, things like that.
How often do you recommend an instrument be serviced?
Well, a change of strings, if the instrument gets heavy use, I mean, most professional players will change strings probably every 3 months. If it gets moderate use, every 6 months.
By general service, we would be talking about checking the pegs are still turning properly, the sound post hasn't moved, the bridge hasn't moved. Would you recommend every 6 months or a year?
Yeah, every 6 months to a year. Again, depending on how much use the instrument gets. If it just gets a small to moderate amount of use, then just giving it a check over once a year or so. If it gets heavy use, then certainly every 6 months it'd be good to have a look to see if anything needs adjusting. If the fingerboard is needs cleaning up, or the pegs need lubricating, something like that.
People quite often call me day or 2 days before the exam and think, I need to get my instrument checked and make sure everything's working okay. But do you recommend, when's the best time to get an instrument serviced? A couple of days before, or maybe a month before? 6 weeks before?
Yeah, a month or 6 weeks before an exam.
Not that day? Or what about changing strings on the day of the exam?
Strings take time to settle in. Some strings don't sound their best when they're fresh on the instrument. The dominants I mentioned before are well known for sounding a bit harsh and metallic for about a week, and then they settle in and sound nice and rich and warm. So the day before an exam or 2 days before an exam is not a good time to start tinkering with your equipment.
Giving the instrument a complete overhaul.
Yes, and if we have to change anything, if a student's been preparing for an exam and then you decide that the bridge of the instrument has been cut badly and needs fixing, well, it may feel quite different to the player when they get it back, even though it might not be better in a better configuration, but they're used to playing and feeling that exactly the position of the string is here, and that may have changed. So they need time to get used to that. So certainly, yeah, the week of an exam is not a good time to think about fixing the instrument. You need to bring it in before then.